Hello, I'm your host Ghida Majzoub, and I'm happy today because I have with me someone who's really professional in the world of the real estate, especially now with the investments and with all the fears that everybody's living regarding investments and regarding what do we do with the money in the banks, or what do we do if we invest in a certain real estate, or whatever. So today he's going to explain to us from A to Z, and we're going to have a series of episodes with him so as to be able to know more about his job and about Equiton, the company that he works with. So today I'm going to introduce to you also Cosme Reveredo, who is a real estate investment advisor and who's going to tell us more about everything that's been happening in the markets lately. Cosme, hello and welcome. It's so good to have you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, Gita. It's a pleasure to do this with you.
Thank you so much. And I would really like you to introduce yourself first, to introduce what do you do, especially now, as I said, because everybody is really worried. Everybody doesn't know what's happening. It's a big mess. So if you can
Yes.
put things in line, it would be excellent.
Yeah. So just by way of introduction, so my name obviously Cosme Reveredo. I am a senior associate of private capital here at Equiton. My background, I come from a finance background. Spent some time out of university working in corporate finance roles. I decided to transition to real estate back in 2017. Largely in the private real estate investment space. I'm a real estate investor myself, of course, with investments in both traditional, brick and mortar real estate as well as these private real estate options as well. And if I'm being very honest, I sort of started to transition more towards these private investments in the last few years,
Mhm.
simply because with all the volatility that you sort of, mentioned, Gita, in your introduction, there's been a lot of obviously volatility, and some of these private investments have been some of the one of the more better performing assets as classes, versus some of that volatility that we were seeing, and then a little bit more consistent and stable as well. And that's really what I've been largely focusing on in the last few years. And I think that's really what I maybe can shed some light for your viewers today as well.
Exactly, exactly. Especially that when we talk about there are many topics to discuss, and we hear a lot of many. Also, we hear a lot of words, or a lot of big words that sometimes we do not understand. Especially the regular citizen, and the regular also investor. He doesn't understand them, like private equity, or a public investment, or whatever. So there are a lot of things that we hear, but we need some explanations about them. If you could really put them in order for us, so as to be able to know which goes with what.
Absolutely. So, you're right. Private equity is sort of like a sexy sounding, phrase. Well, what is private equity, right? And at Equiton, of course, we are a firm that's considered private equity, and really it just means that it's an equity investment that denotes equity in ownership in the asset. So you're not providing us with any form of loan or interest payments, for example. It's a private, since we aren't traded on a public exchange.
Mm.
There is no secondary market to
Okay.
trade these securities. So when you make an investment in a private equity firm like an Equiton, for example, you're doing it directly with the company itself. And
Mhm.
then there's some benefits to going that route, right? If your listeners and viewers own publicly traded stocks, for example, you'll know that in the last year, or last year specifically, there's been a lot of volatility when it comes to the publicly traded market, right?
Yes.
A lot of different macro market factors can impact the stock in a negative way. For example, if a Russia decides to invade a Ukraine, for example, that causes a bit of a disturbance across the globe,
Yes.
and really impacts every single market across
Yes.
the globe, right? But when it comes to these private investments, because there's no correlation to the public market, they don't operate the same as their publicly traded counterparts, because they're not traded on an exchange. And in our case, when it comes to real estate, you can't day trade an apartment building, right?
Mm.
So we can protect ourselves from some of that volatility, and you remove some of that risk. And as an investor, you're sort of left with an investment that is now more stable and more consistently performing over time. It's the reason why a lot of high net worth institutional investors, or even endowment funds and pension funds, they flock to some of these private investments.
So if you want to say the private investments versus public investments, what's the real difference between both of them?
The volatility, really. When you look at a public stock, for example, if you were to purchase a public company stock today, for example, what you'll notice over time is you'll see a bit of a roller coaster pattern, right? And that's simply because public stocks, because they're traded again on emotions, anything that happens in the world, and I like to call it headline risk, right? So when you see headlines across the globe, it impacts everything in terms of the stock market, not necessarily the underlying value of the actual company that you're investing in, for example, right?
Yes.
So, and that's really what that volatility is, just a measure of risk, really, right? And when you see that level of volatility, again, investors, depending on, when they, and it's very difficult to do, it's hard to time a market, for example, but for those folks that are able to, exit at the right time, maybe they've made a lot of money. But there's also the other side of the coin, which is folks that aren't able to time the market because, of course, nobody has a crystal ball, Ghida. So if you're not able to time a market, you may suffer from that volatility as well, right?
Exactly. And also to build the trust itself, because now everybody's losing trust in everything, in all the markets, public or private or whatever, in the banks and everything, in all of the financial sector and the economical sector and the banking and everything. So if you want to be able to build the trust, how would you be able to convince the investor or the citizen, whatever, to be able to build a certain trust with the company, whether it is private or public?
Ultimately, it comes down to the underlying assets that are within the company, and even beyond that, it's the philosophy of the company, their investment thesis, for example, as well as the management team that's in place to direct the company, for example, right? The reason why, private markets, for example, are a nice counterbalance to public markets, because they are not traded on a stock exchange or secondary market, for example. The underlying asset, the true value of an underlying asset, is a true reflection of what the actual ownership of that investment asset is. So you can at least get comfort over knowing that, your investment, whether it's in real estate, whether it's in any other private investment for that matter, you can at least get comfort knowing that the true valuation of what you see today is actually reflective of the assets that are in that investment. Versus a public investment, for example, even public real estate organizations or public real estate investment trusts, for that matter, over the last year, they've seen they've seen a lot of volatility, a lot of fluctuation, but it doesn't necessarily even reflect the true underlying value of the assets that they hold in their company. So it's just, you want to build trust, of course, but you also want to understand that public and private markets, they react very differently. And in order to properly or truly diversify yourself, you want exposure to both, if I'm being honest. So.
Of course. We want to also go into all the details about Equiton and want to get to know Equiton also, and to introduce it to our viewers. But we're gonna leave it to another episode. So today we're gonna stay with this information only, and next time we'll be opening up with Equiton so as to be able to introduce it completely, and so as any viewer who's watching us could be able to get to know exactly what is Equiton, what does it do, and how do they contact you, and whatsoever. So thank you so much, Cosme, for today, and we'll see you very soon so as to be able to move on and to go on with more details about this sector and about all of the financial sectors regarding real estate. So thank you so much for being with us today, Cosme. Thank you. And so as to be able to watch this interview, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel through through www.ghidamajzoub.com, and I will see you soon.
Thank you.